Hi, I'm Dr. Hackie Reitman. Welcome to another episode of Exploring Different Brains for differentbrains.com. And I have the honor today of having right here in our studio a legend down here in South Florida who does so much for so many, Stacey Hoaglund. And I'm not even going to try to tell you in the introduction how many different things she does. Welcome, Stacey.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, now look, let's start by you introducing all the 87 things and entities you're involved with. Take your time and let's start.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a mom, so of two amazing young men. And so it was really my younger son who has autism that got me involved with the disability community. So presently, I am an educational advocate with Family Network on Disabilities. I'm the statewide coordinator for Partners in Policymaking, which is an advocacy training program funded by the Florida Developmental Disabilities Council. I'm the editor of a magazine called the Autism Notebook Magazine. That's a free publication that probably about 68 to 75% of our readers are parents, and then the remainder are providers. So we really try to provide something for everyone that's within the autism community. I'm the president-elect for the Autism Society of Florida. I spent quite a few years as the president of the Broward Autism Society, and it's an amazing organization. I wear a couple hats with the Children's Services Council as far as some special needs advisory committees, and I just work very hard at trying to do my best at helping people through the very complicated system and making sure that people, particularly people with autism, get as much as they can out of life.
Well, I want to thank you personally because you've done such a terrific job, and I know you're working all the time doing all this stuff. I was going to interrupt you to say, why are you so lazy? I remember when the Children's Services Council first came into being down here, and it was at the time it was considered very political going back, and I think they've done a pretty good job. What kind of report card do you give them?
Well, actually, sadly, we just lost Dr. Herm Fishbein, and Dr. Fishbein was hired by the Children's Services Council a little over 10 years ago, I believe, in Broward, and he's really the impetus for change there when it comes to people with disabilities. He created the Special Needs Advisory Coalition. We've changed our names a couple times over the years, and really shed the light on employment opportunities and how to prepare teenagers with developmental disabilities for the world of work. And he kind of sucked me along and pulled me into that. And that committee, even though Herm had left the Children's Services Council, that committee has continued. And what the Children's Services Council provides young people, because it is children, so unfortunately they don't do adult work, which I would love for them to, but they don't, has just grown astronomically. And I think that they have become much more less political and much more grounded in individuals and meeting the individual needs of our community.
Well, that's great. And I visited with Herm up at the Unicorn School, which you were one of the co-founders of it.
Well, it was interesting because I was on an education committee with the Unicorn Foundation, and somebody said something about they were looking for a project, and we started talking about, well, how about a school? We could really use a school, a program that is enriching, that could really be very strength-based focused, because our public education system in general focuses on your deficits, and there was really nothing out there that looked at where are your skills and abilities. That's where we need to go with our instruction. And so we just started brainstorming it, and somebody said to me, who do you think for headmaster? And I said, Herm Fishbein. It was no doubt in my mind. And then we brought in Herm, and the rest is history. It's just been an amazing road, and continues to get better every year.
Very dedicated and persuasive and tough individual. He was good.
Yeah, he was great.
He got it all done. Well, I was very much affected when I went out to at the World Autism Conference out in Tucson, and I got to present there with Temple Grandin and Raul Kaufman and Stephen Shore and all them. Real champions who are themselves neurodiverse. one thing that struck me was the importance they all put on, which I made a chapter in my Asper Tools book about harnessing the hyper interests, harnessing them and going with the strengths, as opposed to stop doing that.
Right.
It's like, let's make this better and stronger while you're strengthening the other parts. Right. In your experience, you found also that to work on the strengths at what we can do to maximize health, happiness, safety, productivity, and independence, whatever chance there is.
Right. Well, quality of life is something that everybody wants, no matter if you have a disability or you don't. And if you spend day after day being beaten over the head where your weaknesses are, how would you possibly have a quality of life? So by looking at where a person's strengths are and helping guide them down that path is so much more effective. I met with a family years ago. I remember their daughter was 19, and I met with the mom and the dad and the girl, and she had a cognitive disability, and we were talking about employment. She was 19, so I wanted to talk about, okay, she's still in school, but where are we going? What are we doing? And the dad said to me, oh no, she's not going to work. And I said, why? And he said, because she can't work. And I looked at her there and I said, do you want to work? And she goes, I think so. And so the parents, as lovely as they were, they really felt that there was nothing out there for her. Because that was at a time when we had a special diploma still in the state of Florida. And they just thought she's going to get a special diploma and she'll just be at home. They were an affluent family, so they could have her taken care of, and so that was not a concern. And when I started talking about quality of life and how much quality of life we get out of what we do every day, out of our profession, they kind of started to bend a little bit. And I said to the girl, what do you like? What do you like to do?
And by the way, what do you like to do is something the parents hardly ever ask.
I know. They're usually shocked when I ask them that question. And so she liked clothes. She liked earrings. She liked fashion magazines. And so we were able to get her community-based instruction through the school at a 579, which is a clothing store for young women at the mall. And they hired her. And when I went in there to go shopping one day, she was a greeter, and so she wasn't able to run the cash register, but she was so happy to be there and help people match their clothing that they were purchasing. And the manager said to me that she had no better employee than this young woman. So they won because they got a great employee. She won because she was so happy. She felt fulfilled, and she had a purpose to getting up, and she was making friends and building relationships.
Giving people a job or an activity kills 10 birds with one stone. It really does. It does. And I think we've inadvertently discriminated against adults with our focus on the children. Well, the children all grow up.
Yeah. Well, you spend a lot more time as an adult than you do as a child. So being able to give the kids what they need as they're coming through those transition years, but with the foresight to know that you're preparing them for a very, a much longer period of time. So the intensity of the instruction when kids get to high school should not be less than what it was when they were getting that early intervention. Because that intervention needs to last them a long time.
Where did you grow up?
In South Florida, in Hollywood.
Right here. And how did you get into all of this?
Just my son. Prior to having my children, I actually worked for Broward Schools. And then I thought, I'm going to have my kids. I'm going to stay home. My life is going to be peaceful. I'm just going to travel and enjoy, peace and tranquility. And then, so I had my first son, and then I had my second one, who had some developmental lagging early on. And just like many parents, my pediatrician kept saying, he's fine, he's fine. And then one evening, a friend of mine who was a school principal was over for dinner, and I saw her keeping an eye on him. And then she called me the next day, and she said, I don't want you to be mad at me, but, I have kids with autism in my school. And Zachary's showing some of those symptoms. And I said, I know, and I keep questioning it, but the doctor says no. And she said, I think you need another opinion. So I went to my pediatrician, and he said, well, I don't think that she knows what she's talking about, but I'll send you to a neurologist. And 5 minutes in a neurologist's office. I mean, and now looking back, I can't believe that I didn't see it, because he wasn't this
Well,
autistic.
here's
He
the
had a
thing,
lot of issues going
and
on.
here's what I speak about a lot, is multifactorial. First of all, I kind of make fun of myself and all of us parents because we're so blinded by love. And you get a combination of love, ignorance, denial, people telling you it's going to be all right.
Right, well, dealing with a medical establishment that tells you, stop worrying, he's fine, he's a boy, he's delayed.
Well, when we interviewed Dr. Brian Udell, the autism doctor, who's vociferous and says, look, the medical establishment has no clue. And I say, yes, but it's not their fault because they don't get educated in it. Doctors get no training. In my own personal journey, after my daughter Rebecca started tutoring at Cumberland Academy of Georgia, which was for Aspies and autism and other developmental learning challenges, the owner of the school met Rebecca for 10 minutes, said, your daughter has Asperger's. And me, the Boston-trained MD, said, what's that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's on the spectrum of autism. Do you know what that is? Kind of. I'd gotten no training. And that didn't make me a bad person any more than it makes a lot of these teachers who don't get the proper training, or policemen who don't get the training, doctors, and go on down the line.
Right.
So it's a societal kind of thing. And if society just realizes that we're, as Temple Grandin said, different, not less, we'll be better off. What is the legislative atmosphere like in Florida right now?
Well, we're actually going through a major change coming into this next session, because about half of our state legislators are going to be changing. So this past year, we had Andy Gardner as our Senate president, who has a son with Down syndrome. So Andy was really, and his wife Camille, are really passionate advocates at the state level and a voice for us on the Senate, not only on the Senate floor, but he was the Senate president. And we're losing him because he's terming out. His wife Camille is an amazing woman and pretty determined in getting his legacy to continue with other legislators. But we have a major vote coming, not only for our presidency, but throughout our state. And people really need to educate themselves and get out and vote, because it's really hard to say, because we're going to be changing out so many people. Every year, the Florida Developmental Disabilities Council puts on something called DD Day. ARC of Florida is also heavily involved with that. And it's in Tallahassee. And I was there, I want to say it was like February 18th. And it was funny because I had been in the House because the House, they were running late in their session that day. I got to my plane. My plane was like around a 5:30 plane to come back. And I'm on the plane, and rushing onto the plane comes these guys in suits. There's like 5 or 6 of them. They're sitting all around me. And so I looked at the guy across the aisle and I said, "You guys from the House?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah. Why did you think that?" And I said, "Because I was in the House. And I know that you guys were running late today and you're in suits and you're rushing on a plane. So I figured maybe you're from there." And they were like, "Yeah." And they were both Republicans and Democrats. And so we just got into a conversation about disabilities and children and adults and the needs of the state. And sometimes you got to catch them when they're not wearing their business hat, sitting on a plane for an hour coming home. And like I said, they were both sides of the aisle on the plane, and they were both parties were so open to what I was saying, because I told them, this is not a partisan issue. This is just good stuff, and taking care of people in our state who you guys, we're your constituents. You are our representatives. We go out, we vote for you, and we expect you to represent us when you're doing your job up there in Tallahassee. And they were so open to everything, and they agreed, yes, this is totally a nonpartisan issue. And I looked at the 2 of them. One was Republican and Democrat. And I want you two to make sure that you work together on this kind of stuff, because when you're doing this, nobody wins. We had a big swell when my son was young of the number, particularly of autism. So the adults entering, or the kids who were kids at like 21 18 to 21, 22 years old, there's a big mushroom effect, and they're going to be hitting the adult world, and we're not equipped. So we're seeing some movements, and Andy Gardner was a huge part of that because he really pushed our university system to develop educational programs for people who wouldn't be your typical degree-seeking individual, but learning independent functioning skills and job skills, and with an inclusionary spin, not sheltered workshops and separate training facilities and things like that. The best and the safest place for somebody with a disability to be employed or spend their day is surrounded by people who do not have disabilities. We're also battling, restraint and seclusion, and being able to have the people that we love, that we represent, as included in society as we can, and having them have a seat at the table, because it can't be the rest of us making decisions for them. They need to be part of this as well, and they want to be part of it. And they may not be able to communicate verbally, and that doesn't mean that they don't have anything to say. And they need to be part of the equation, because if they're not, then we're not doing our jobs.
Tell us about the book that you wrote.
Well, the book I wrote is called Go for the Goal, and it really came about because I had teachers as well as parents calling me, do you have some good IEP goals? Give me some goals. Give me some goals that I can write in the student's IEP or on my child's IEP. And I would, over the years, just email people, okay, so here's some ideas. And I thought, oh, this is kind of crazy. I have to keep setting these goals. So let me just get them all together. And so that's what I did. I just put them all together, and I tried to break the book down into, I compartmentalize it into young children and these areas, so social, emotional, behavior. Here's the goals that I would recommend for a young child. And then all the way up, there's the chapters towards the end of the book are all for transition age kids, with a strong focus on employment, independent living, social development when you're out there in the real world on the job site, and your boss says, okay, you got a 20-minute break, and you've never been taught leisure time skills, and you don't know what to do with a break. And a lot of teachers even forget that they have to teach young people with autism, what do you do when you have a break? What activity can you do in the lunchroom or the break room? If I'm working at Publix, then I go into the break room. What can I do in there for 20 minutes? And because people don't think about that. Individuals with autism might be great workers. You tell them what to do and you structure it. They can be, when you walk into a store and you see all the cans of vegetables and everything, they want them perfect. They like it to look beautiful. But you throw them into a break room, and what do I do? How do I handle this? Sometimes that's the most complicated place for an individual with autism, is not on the floor working, but it's on their breaks.
Tell us how our audience who would like to get in touch with you, tell us the various ways, because you're wearing so many different hats, where they might be able to find you.
Well, social media has really made access to people so much easier. So you can literally go onto Facebook and throw my name in there, and you'll kind of find I have a couple different pages on Facebook. But if it's something to do with advocacy, it's fndbroward.com.
What does that stand for?
Family Network on Disabilities.
Okay.
And then there's for the Partners in Policy Making, which is the statewide program, that is fddc.org. And there's a link there for Partners in Policy Making. For the Autism Notebook, which is the magazine that I publish, and it's free. So anybody, if you just search for that on Facebook, the Autism Notebook, you can, right there, you can get the links to all of our publications through the Facebook page. And the beauty in that is, since we've had writers from 5 different continents, literally we're everywhere, because people from the different countries around the world who have written for us, they share it with their people. And so it's fabulous. And everything about the magazine is positive. It's like my shining light in my day, because we really just strive to help people have an easier go at things, so that at the end of the article, I always stress to the writers when they say, what do you want me to write? What do you want out of the article? And I always tell them, I want the person who reads it to come out at the end of it with new ideas of how to make the individual, either themselves or the individual that they're working with autism, make their life be better or easier or more productive or more positive. And so the magazine is awesome.
So we've been speaking with Stacey Hoaglund today. And Stacey, I want to thank you for taking the time to come down. You're a fierce mom, advocate, activist, and you're helping so many other people with all of the different entities you just discussed. And keep up the good work. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
For more information, visit us at differentbrains.com.